Hello and welcome to America's Veterans. My name is Len Sorotsky and I will be your host. And I would like to introduce you to Marilyn, my wife and co-host of nearly 40 years. Hi, Marilyn. Our flag, the American flag, is critically important to every American. Our flag is us. If you are an American, you pledge allegiance to only one flag. Almost all history is controversial, such as who made the first 13-star flag. So, these are my interpretations of all that I have read and studied over the years. Much of who we are, including our flag, came from England. So, we will begin there. The flag of England, the Cross of St. George, was introduced by King Richard I around 1194 during the Crusades. St. George is the patron saint of England, probably derived from the myth of St. George and the dragon. There was a town in Libya, and a dragon lived in a local lake. The dragon regularly made demands on the town. So it happened that the princess was chosen to be fed to the dragon. George came along and he decided to defend her. He stopped the dragon with his lance, and then he asked the princess if he could have her girdle. He placed it around the dragon's neck such that she could easily lead the dragon back into town, where George cut off the dragon's head, a demonstration of extreme courage and chivalry. King Edward I conquered most of Wales in 1283. Wales had been under the rule of various lords, land conquered by the Normans in the 11th and 12th centuries following the invasion of 1066. It was not until Henry VIII passed the Acts of Union in 1536 that Wales became compliant. However, the Welsh flag was never a part of the English flag. The flag of Scotland is the Cross of St. Andrew. He was one of the 12 disciples of Jesus. He was martyred by being bound to a cross rather than nailed, so that his suffering could be prolonged. Andrew was chosen as the patron saint of Scotland, and his flag joined to form the Union flag came after James VI of Scotland became King James I of England in 1603, following the death of the last of the Tudors. If we jump ahead to 1801, we see the Irish flag, or the Cross of St. Patrick, added to the British flag. Patrick was born in England around the year 385. At age 16, he was captured by Irish raiders. After 6 years, he escaped, but later returned as a Christian missionary. He is credited with bringing Christianity to Ireland, as well as removing all snakes. He died on March 17 in 460, a date celebrated around the world as St. Patrick's Day. His cross was joined to the Union flag to make the present colors of the United Kingdom. And if you look closely at this flag, you will see St. George's cross in the middle, St. Andrew's cross in the background, and then on top of St. Andrew's cross is St. Patrick's cross, the flag of the United Kingdom. Going back now to the Grand Union flag, combined with the King's colors and 13 stripes representing the 13 colonies. It was called Continental Colors, ultimately flown by those who were opposed to the American Revolution. Continental Colors. As the colonies developed many individual colony and regional flags, New England had many flags that began with the starving winter of 1621 and 22. The Pennacook Indians used an Algonquin term meaning children of the pine tree, and this term was woven into many flags. The French and Indian War was fought between 1754 and 1763. Found the colonists fighting with the British forces against the French and their Indian allies. The British gained control of much French-claimed lands, especially in the middle of America. George Washington was born in 1732. He was only 21 years old when he became involved in our war with France. And only a year later, at age 22, Washington was made a colonel, and he fought in his first real engagement. Soon after the end of the French and Indian War, the American Revolution began. And we had no single flag, but we did have many different flags. And Marilyn will show you just briefly some of the different flags that were used. And you'll notice that in these different flags, stars are commonplace, and red and white stripes, usually red and white, sometimes blue, were common, and snakes were very common, seen either as a whole snake or as a snake cut into 13 pieces. Another flag of the Revolution, before we had a flag of our own, says "Win or Die," and that was that. And this flag it's kind of important because it shows that there were many colonists who were real Christian believers, and the appeal to heaven says that they were trusting God in their war with the British. And then this last one is called the Culpeper flag, and once again you see the snake on that Minutemen flag. And I'd like to point out the Minutemen was a group of Americans in virtually every single town in America. And the Minutemen were those who wanted revolution, and they said that they would be ready to go to war in a minute, hence Minutemen. The Second Continental Congress created the Continental Army on June 14, 1775. John Adams nominated George Washington to lead the army, and he assumed command on July 3rd, 1775 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This flag became the headquarters flag of General George Washington. Then we get into some of the individual flags that were used at certain battles. One of the more famous battles, I suppose, was the Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17, 1775. The battle was actually a defeat for the colonial forces, mostly because they ran out of ammunition. The British were repulsed twice before finally taking the hill, but they had suffered severe losses. The Americans under William Prescott were able to escape to Cambridge, and the Battle of Bunker Hill took on the air of a mighty victory. We were buying cannons and ammunition in the Bahamas and therefore we needed to have ships. The U.S. Navy was created on October 13, 1775, and the first U.S. Navy Jack appeared. Several of the first ships of the U.S. Navy were purchased by Martha Washington, the general's very wealthy wife. The Washington pew at Christ Church in Philadelphia was next to the pew of 25-year-old seamstress Betsy Ross. Washington asked Betsy to create a flag with a 6-pointed star in 1776. She opted for a 5-pointed star because she discovered a way of folding material over and over, and then with one snip of her scissors, out popped a 5-pointed star. The Continental Congress had adopted her flag on June 14, 1777. So we finally had a flag, now known as Flag Day. Congress had resolved that the flag of the United States be 13 stripes, alternate red and white, that the Union be 13 stars, white in a blue field, representing a new constellation. Betsy lost 2 husbands to the war, but she herself lived to age 84. In February of 1779, John Paul Jones took command of a French-built merchant ship, and he renamed her Bonhomme Richard in honor of Benjamin Franklin. He converted the merchant into a 64-gun ship of the line. Jones sailed to Bordeaux and joined a squadron to search for British merchant ships. On September 23, the squadron encountered the Baltic fleet of 41 ships off the coast of England in the Battle of Flatborough Head. The Serapis, the most heavily armed British ship, killed Americans by the score. The commanding officer called out to Jones to surrender, to which he replied, "Sir, I've not yet begun to fight." After lashing the 2 ships together, the Richard was shattered and on fire. But it was the captain of the Serapis who surrendered about 10:30 p.m. on September 24. Jones took command of the British warship, and he adopted the Serapis flag. On March 15, 1781, Lord Charles Cornwallis defeated a group of Americans at the small North Carolina hamlet of Guilford Courthouse. Although American Major General Nathaniel Greene was forced to retreat, Cornwallis had lost more than 25% of his force, both British and German. Cornwallis moved into Virginia, but 7 months later, he met George Washington and his French forces at the Battle of Yorktown on October 19, 1781, and was forced to surrender. For all practical purpose, the war was over, but the official end of the war did not come until September 3, 1783, with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. As each new state was formed, a star would be added to the flag. With the admission of Vermont and Kentucky came the 15-star flag, the Star-Spangled Banner flag. The War of 1812 was declared on June 18. The President's House in Washington, D.C. was burned by British forces. Once rebuilt, the President's House was repainted white. Dolly Madison, wife of then President James Madison, saved Stuart's painting of George Washington and other works of art as they fled from the British. But the battle cry of the war was, "Remember the Raisin." It signified America's worst loss during a battle south of Detroit on the Raisin River. 379 Americans were killed and another 561 were wounded or captured. Over the night and morning of September 13, 14, in the year 1814, Attorney Francis Scott Key, along with Colonel John Skinner, had been sent to negotiate the release of Dr. William Beans. They watched the bombardment of Fort McHenry while being held captive aboard a British ship. Key saw the 30-foot by 42-foot flag sewed by Mary Pickersgill flying over the fort. He saw it with the light of every exploding bomb, and again with the dawn of the new day. Americans had blocked the entry to the harbor by sinking 22 ships. So many of the bombs did not even reach the fort. That was done to protect the city of Baltimore. The British fired an estimated 1,500 shells, some up to 220 pounds, but the fort did not surrender. Key was so inspired that on the next day when he was released and on his way back to Baltimore, he wrote a poem which he called The Defense of Fort McHenry. That poem was later put to music and became our national anthem in 1931 by a congressional resolution as the Star-Spangled Banner. Another fascinating story about the War of 1812 was that the Battle of New Orleans was fought after the war was over, and that's a testimony to slow communications of the day. 700 British were killed, 1,400 were wounded. Andrew Jackson's American forces and losses included 8 killed and 13 wounded. The War of 1812 was over. American settlers continued moving west after the war, and the flag that was used by Americans, known as Texans, at the Battle of the Alamo in 1836. It was a request to return to the Mexican Constitution of 1824. Other flags said more simply, "Come and take us." After a 12-day siege, Mexican President Santa Anna crashed into the Alamo, and about 200 persons were killed, including William Travis, Jim Bowie, and Davy Crockett. All the bodies were burned and buried, but no one knows where. Texas became a state in 1845. Stars continued being added until our nation was almost split in two. It was the Civil War. The North had its flag, the Fort Sumter flag, and the South had its own nation flag. This is the national genuine flag of the Confederacy, but the better known flag is probably the Southern battle flag. We still see some of these every once in a while. After the Civil War was over, we reformed as one nation. It was the bloodiest war in our history. And with the addition of New Mexico and Arizona in 1912, our flag had 48 stars. This flag was the one that carried us through World War I, World War II, and the Korean War. Alaska and Hawaii joined the Union in 1959, and that created our current 50-star flag. This is a flag of Vietnam, and it carries us through our current encounters around the world. Counting from the upper left-hand corner, Florida is represented by star number 27. The Pledge of Allegiance was written in 1892 by Francis Bellamy. The words to the pledge have changed since then, most recently by adding the words, "Under God," by President Dwight Eisenhower in 1954. When I was a young boy, we would say the pledge every morning in school. We would stand at attention and we would raise a military-style salute. At the words, "To my flag," we would extend our right hand with palms up, but it was deemed too close to the Nazi salute, which had the palms down. And so the raising the hand is removed, and so today we simply keep our hand on our heart as we pledge our flag. The next time that you pledge our beautiful flag, would you please listen carefully to the words? They mean so much. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.